Ridge stood at the altar, his fitted tuxedo emphasizing his broad shoulders and aristocratic appearance. His eyes, which were always warm and dominating, flickered with a hint of distraction. Taylor, gorgeous in a flowing ivory gown, stood beside him, her smile calm yet laced with the weight of their shared past. The officiant's voice droned on, uttering vows that should have felt final, but instead hung in the air, heavy with unspoken realities. The guests, family, friends, and Forrester Creations colleagues, watched with bated breath, their faces filled with joy, curiosity, and, for those familiar with the Forrester narrative, apprehension. This was, after all, a family notorious for dramatic twists, and no wedding in their world went off without a hitch. Brooke Logan, Ridge's longtime partner, sat among the audience. Her presence, even when tucked discreetly in the back, was impossible to ignore. Her blonde hair gleamed in the sunlight, and her exquisite emerald dress embraced her shape, a simple statement of her enduring appeal. She had not wanted to go, but her children, Hope and RJ, urged. "It's time for closure, Mom," Hope murmured, her voice gentle but forceful. "You need to see this to move on." Brooke nodded, but her heart was not convinced. She and Ridge had been through far too much, passionate highs, tragic lows, and innumerable promises broken and renewed. Even now, as he prepared to commit his life to Taylor, Brooke felt the usual pull, the magnetic connection that had defined their decades-long relationship. Ridge's gaze moved almost reflexively to the back of the audience, as the officiant's words faded away. His gaze met Brooke's, and for a brief time, the world appeared to stop. Her breath hitched, and she straightened in her seat, her heart hammering despite her efforts to remain calm. She recognized that expression. Ridge's eyes had always spoken louder than his words. It was the expression of a man struggling with his soul, caught between duty and passion. Taylor saw the shift and followed his gaze, her grin weakening. The guests began to mumble as they sensed the tension, which crackled like static in the air. "Ridge." Taylor's voice was gentle, almost imploring, and she reached for his hand. He turned back to her, his expression opaque, but his grip on her hand was slack and reluctant. The officiant cleared his throat, trying to recover control of the situation. "Ridge, do you take Taylor to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward?" The question hung in the air, and the stillness afterward was deafening. Ridge's jaw tightened, his gaze shifting back to Brooke, then Taylor, and finally to the ground. The crowd leaned forward, the gravity of the situation pushing down on them all. Brooke's hands gripped in her lap, her nails cutting into her palms as she fought the need to stand, speak, or do anything to relieve the awful strain. And then, in a barely audible whisper, Ridge said 5 words that sent a tremor through the crowd. "I can't do this again." The remark struck like a thunderclap, destroying the ceremony's carefully built facade. The crowd let out a collective gasp. Taylor's hand slid from his, her expression one of disbelief and hurt. Brooke halted, her eyes wide, unsure whether she had heard right. The officiant fumbling with his book, while Ridge's father, Eric Forrester, jumped up from his seat, his countenance a mix of concern and frustration. Ridge and Taylor's children, Steffi and Thomas, exchanged startled looks, their devotion to their mother at odds with their comprehension of their father's complex heart. Ridge turned to Taylor, his voice husky from grief. "You are incredible, Taylor. You have repeatedly served as my rock and salvation. I believe this was correct. I thought I could go forward and offer you the life you deserved, but I can't lie to you or myself anymore." His statements were raw, unrestrained, and each one struck like a blow. Taylor's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she kept her head up, her strength a silent force even amid her pain. The visitors were now in a state of pandemonium, with whispers escalating to murmurs and eventually to loud talk. Hope grabbed her mother's hand and squeezed her fiercely, while RJ's jaw tensed, his protective instincts heightened. Brooke, however, was unable to move. Her heart was racing, her mind a frenzy of memories. Every moment she and Ridge had shared, every commitment they'd made, every time they'd found their way back to each other just to be separated again. She wanted to flee, disappear, but her body refused to cooperate. Ridge moved away from the altar slowly but deliberately. The crowd parted as he proceeded down the aisle, his gaze fixed on Brooke. She stood nearly against her will as he approached. The world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, with the visitors' voices fading into a distant murmur. "Brooke," he whispered softly but firmly, "I've tried to let you go. I've tried to be the guy Taylor and my family want me to be. But every time I believe I'm free, I am drawn back to you. It has always been you." Brooke shook her head as tears streamed down her face. "Ridge, do not do this. Not here. Not now." Her voice quivered, but there was hardness below. She knew the cost of this moment, the anguish it would cause Taylor, their children, and everyone who had believed in their wedding. But Ridge's eyes were unwavering, brimming with a confidence she hadn't seen in years. "I have to," he explained, his voice breaking. "I've spent my life avoiding this fact, attempting to do what's best for everyone else. But I can't marry Taylor while my heart is with you. I love you, Brooke. I always have. I always will." The remarks were a bombshell, shattering the fragile serenity of the day. Taylor, still standing at the altar, looked aside, her shoulders trembling as Steffi raced to her side, glaring at her father. The guests were now on their feet, shouting and crying, and the turmoil was bursting like a storm. Eric attempted to call for order, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos. Hope drew Brooke back, whispering quickly, "Mom, we need to leave. This is too much." But Brooke couldn't take her gaze away from Ridge, couldn't avoid the weight of his confession. Ridge reached for Brooke's hand, but she backed back, her emotions jumbled with love, rage, and guilt. "You can't keep doing this," she whispered, barely heard amid the din. "You can't keep hurting hearts to pursue a feeling. What about Taylor? How about your children? How about me, Ridge? How can I trust this?" He trembled, her words cutting deeper than a razor. "I know I've hurt you," he admitted. "I realize I've hurt everyone. But I'm done pretending. I'm done living a lie. I want to be with you, Brooke. Not because it is easy, but because it is genuine." Taylor's voice broke through the hubbub, crisp and forceful. "Enough." She walked forward, her composure restored, but her eyes burned with betrayal. "Ridge, if this is your truth, speak it. But don't stand here humiliating me in front of our family and friends. If you select her, depart. But do not expect me to wait for you again." The ultimatum hung in the air like a line carved in the sand. Ridge gazed between the two women, his decision weighing heavily on him. Brooke, frightened, took another step backward. "I can't do this," she said quietly, turning to go. But Ridge grabbed her arm, his touch mild but firm. "Please," he begged in a hoarse voice. "Do not walk away. Not this time." The moment stretched taut and fragile, and the entire crowd held their breath. Brooke's gaze searched his, seeking the truth beneath his words, for the guy she'd loved through countless storms. And in that moment, she recognized it. The vulnerability, certainty, and love that had always been there, hidden beneath layers of doubt and obligation. But she knew that love was never enough by itself. Not in their world, where every decision had repercussions that left wounds. She released her arm, her voice firm despite the tears. "I need time, Ridge. We all do." And with that, she walked away, the gathering falling silent as she passed. Ridge stood motionless, watching her leave, as Taylor returned to the altar, her head held high even as her world disintegrated. The wedding had ended, but their narrative was far from over. The events that followed were chaotic. The visitors dispersed, some in startled silence, others chatting fiercely about the controversy that would dominate the news for weeks. Steffi and Thomas faced their father, their rage evident, while Hope and RJ rallied around Brooke, attempting to protect her from the consequences. Eric, the patriarch, attempted to mediate, but even he understood the wound would take time to heal. Brooke returned to her cabin, where she and Ridge had shared many stolen moments over the years. She sat beside the window, staring out at the darkening sky, her thoughts returning to his words. "It's always been you." They were the words she had hoped to hear, but they came at a price she wasn't sure she could afford. Taylor deserved better. Their kids deserved better. And yet, Ridge's draw was as powerful as ever, a force she couldn't resist no matter how hard she tried. Across town, Ridge sat alone in his Forrester Creations office, the weight of his decision descending over him like a veil. He'd meant every word he'd uttered, but the ramifications were just beginning to emerge. He remembered Taylor, her power and grace, and the agony he had caused her. He remembered Brooke, the lady who had always been his North Star, even while he was lost. And he considered the future, which was unpredictable and full with problems, but for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of optimism. He had made his decision, and he would fight for it. As night descended over Los Angeles, the city was abuzz with word of the wedding that wasn't. Social media erupted with speculation, newspapers fought for exclusives, and the Forrester family braced for the storm ahead. But for Ridge and Brooke, the real war had only just begun. A battle not only for love, but also for redemption, trust, and the opportunity to finally do it right. The days after were a jumble of emotions and conflicts. Taylor, ever resilient, immersed herself into her work, desperate to regain her dignity. She visited with Steffi and Thomas, assuring them that she would be okay, even though her heart ached. "Your father has made his choice," she said, her voice firm, "and I need to make mine. I chose myself." Brooke, meanwhile, struggled with her own heart. She met with Hope, who cautioned her to use caution. "Mom, I know you love him," Hope remarked, her eyes wide with fear. "But you deserve someone who chooses you without hesitation, without all this drama." Brooke nodded, but she knew Ridge was more than just a choice. He was knit into the fabric of her existence. Ridge, for his part, refused to surrender. He sent Brooke flowers, left voicemails, and even came to her cabin, standing on the doorstep like a guy screaming for his life. "I know I've hurt you," he continued, his voice full of sorrow. "But I am here, and I am not going anywhere. Tell me what you need, Brooke. Tell me how to make things right." She did not have an answer, yet. The wounds were raw, and the stakes were too great. But when she gazed into his eyes, she recognized the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, the man who had promised her forever and meant it, even if he had faltered along the way. The Forrester family, broken but resilient, began to deal with the aftermath. Eric convened a family gathering and urged everyone to find a way ahead. "We've been through worse," he stated, his voice steely. "We will get through this. But we must do it together." His words served as a reminder of the family's unwavering courage in the face of betrayal and suffering. Brooke and Ridge gradually and painstakingly rebuilt as the weeks evolved into months. They went to therapy to confront the patterns that had kept them stuck in a cycle of love and loss. They spoke their worries, hopes, and goals for a future that would avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. It wasn't easy. Trust had to be gained, wounds had to be healed, but for the first time, they were both fully devoted and no longer hiding from the reality. Taylor, too, discovered her path. She traveled, reconnected with old acquaintances, and rediscovered the pieces of herself she had reserved for Ridge. She forgiven him not for his benefit, but for her own, choosing to let go of the anguish and embrace the possibilities of a new chapter. The Forrester narrative, as always, continued to unfold, full of passion, drama, and the undying power of love in all its messy, tangled glory. Ridge and Brooke's journey was far from over, but for the time being they stood together, ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that their bond, flawed, tested, but unbreakable, was worth fighting for.